If you get a lot of VC money, you can be sloppy, right? Investment money, hire a lot of people, hire experts, and there's just a lot of fat there that maybe you don't do things as well, and you can burn through a lot of cash. And then if you don't turn the corner to profitability in time, you could flame out. And a lot of companies go through that. And then investors and the founders, they lose everything.
Welcome to the DTC Insider podcast, where online business owners come to find actionable tips and tactics to grow their businesses. Now, here's your host, Brian Roisentul.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the DTC Insider podcast. I'm Brian Roisentul, your host, and today I'm super excited to interview David Bean, the founder of Nira. Hey, David, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I look forward to the show.
Yeah, so why don't you start by introducing yourself and Nira as well?
Sure. I'm an engineer at heart. Started with mechanical engineering, got into optics, and then semiconductor lasers, first in the communications field. And then I started my own laser chip company that makes chips inside a lot of the devices we might be aware of, like driverless cars, military range finding, space navigation, but also professional medical systems that are used by doctors and dermatologists. And then most recently, in the last 15 years, I launched Nira, which takes that semiconductor technology to the home market. So you can buy a home laser to rejuvenate your skin without the side effects or the costs or the downtime that you would normally experience, like in office.
So that's very interesting and sounds very complex. I'm sure it is. So could you please walk me through, the journey and how you went from, how do you say, not manufacturing, but programming chips? You mentioned for space or for vehicles as well, right?
Yeah, these are semiconductor laser chips or laser diodes.
Oh, okay.
Single diode converts electrons to photons very efficiently. Prior to semiconductor lasers, there were gas lasers and crystal lasers, and these were very large, very inefficient, very expensive, and hard to maintain lasers. But when semiconductors came along, we basically reduced the lasers from the size of a large old-fashioned tube television set, that was hundreds of pounds, to basically the size of a laptop for professional settings and even industrial settings in factories for lasers and welding and things like that. So anyway, I was part of the telecom industry that had to use semiconductor lasers because they're just so much more efficient and so much more reliable than the old technology. And the power requirements weren't huge, just a couple hundred milliwatts for amplifying internet signals. So that's where I got my start with lasers. That industry kind of had a downsizing. After we built out all the infrastructure in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was kind of a consolidation of the industry. And that's where I decided to launch my own company to make chips for non-telecom applications. So we made the semiconductor chips at higher powers than telecom. But they were multi-mode instead of single mode, but that was okay because you just needed raw power for treating the skin elements, or anti-aging, or surgical lasers for varicose veins and other applications, or for other industries like space navigation. You want high power so you can shoot at a distance. And for like docking with the International Space Station, they bounce lasers off reflectors on the space station, and then they know exactly where the capsule is when it's docking to the space station. Methodically, has many steps at a certain couple hundred yards, then a few hundred yards, then 100 yards, and then just a few meters, and it stops each time to make sure it's in perfect alignment. And our lasers help that process to ensure accuracy and, of course, safety. And then we're also in munitions targeting. You use lasers to target where you want that, shot to go or that munitions to go. So we're in that industry, but we sell the chips. We don't do the systems. And then driverless cars with laser radars becoming more popular. And so we're starting to sell chips into that industry. But my heart was really to bring it to the home market. So that's why I started Nira. So literally you could take the same professional chip technology that dermatologists use to correct skin, and it can address lots of things, not just anti-aging. And we did it in a safe way. It took years to develop this because we were basically downsizing professional systems, putting in your hand literally but doing it in a way that's safe, still has the efficacy, and doesn't have any side effects. Because at the dermatologist, you get pain, you get redness or erythema, you get downtime after your treatment, you have several days of like healing. And I wanted to avoid all that. And so that's what I've been doing with Nira.
Okay, so first off, that's really impressive. I think it's the most technical interview I have had in the 5 seasons of this podcast. So I appreciate the explanation. And second, what year are we talking about? Which year are we talking about here? When did you start with Nira?
So I love technology now. I could talk all day. So if I get too technical, just let me know. We
Oh, it's
started in 2012. So this is what, 15, well, it's about 13 years ago. Yeah.
wow,
So it was a while ago. It took 8 years to develop the laser because we
eight
had,
years.
yeah, a full 8 years.
Wow.
So thankfully, I had patient investors. And when you have a similar technology, you can do it much faster because it's just a slight tweak. But we were taking the professional lasers, bringing them to the home. But to avoid those side effects, we had to develop a unique approach where we heat the dermis in kind of a sweet spot, which we patented, which is below the point of pain and erythema and necrosis. Necrosis is cell death. So we're not destroying any of the tissue or popping blood vessels or even causing pain, but we're kind of like other industries where you stimulate an almost immune response. It's not a vaccine, but we're stimulating a rebuilding, a rejuvenation response in the dermis just below the point where any damage happens or any side effects. And so you got a laser. Lasers typically just blast away, and they'll just keep going deeper and getting hotter and everything. But we had to design this, both the hardware and the software, so it very precisely quickly ramps up the heat, but then levels off and gets just below the pain threshold where you feel nice warm heat, but there's no side effects. And yet you're stimulating all the rejuvenation without any of the side effects. So that's what we patented. And not only did it took about 4 to 6 years to develop it. Then we needed a couple years because we had to go through our own clinical studies because we couldn't say this is qualified similar to these other things because it was different. It was the same laser chip, but we're driving it in a different way to react in the dermis differently than the professional lasers to avoid all the issues. And so literally we spent a full year and a half on clinical studies and analysis. And then you need about a half a year of FDA clearance where you submit, it was over 2,000 pages in our report to the FDA to prove the efficacy and the safety. And then, they reviewed very thoroughly. And then we got the clearance, right? And so then we had to do a few other regulatory hurdles before we could launch. So that is why it takes so long.
Okay, so that makes sense. Not to compare you to a YouTuber, and you will see where I'm going here, but I'm talking about Mr. Beast. It's he has the largest audience in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a business person. Mr. Beast for sure, and multiple nine-figure companies. The guy is a beast, literally. And I was listening to the episode he recorded with Stephen Bartlett at the Diary of a CEO podcast. It was a very interesting interview. The guy's so busy that they recorded at 1 a.m. in the morning. So his life is crazy. And he said, and this is where I wanted to go, that everyone thinks he's a genius now because he's, of course, very accomplished. But he started his journey at the age of 11, and everyone thought the opposite back then.
Of course.
So his mother, friends, he was like, "What are you doing?" So the point is that everyone sees you now and see what you have accomplished with Nira. Congrats, by the way. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. But what did things look like when you started with this? Because I guess that it wasn't hard. It requires clear vision, a lot of like drive, conviction. So what were some of the key things that you would say for anyone listening that is looking to, follow with their passion, and probably a long process that they should probably have the bumps in the road that they need to overcome to see the light at the end of the tunnel, let's say?
Sure. So if you're looking to start a business, especially a business that is completely unique, there's going to be barriers in the way. It's just everyone. You look at even the most famous, actually, the bigger the barriers, typically the more famous you get. You look at Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and others. They took on huge companies, huge industries as no ones, right? Literally, people, didn't take them seriously. And my journey was no exception, right? So you have to have that passion. You also have to have a background in what you're going to do, right? So I had the background in telecommunications lasers, and I can bring that forward to the lasers outside of telecom with my own chip company. And then I learned about the professional vertical and skincare aspect of lasers. And I learned a lot about that before I launched Nira, going after that vertical with my second company. And so my advice, I guess, is first of all, find where your skill set lies and find what you're interested in. And if you can literally line up what you're interested in and where your skill set lies and go after it, and you can develop the skill set. I didn't know lasers at the beginning. And so just like, the example you brought out earlier, he started early, but you don't have to necessarily start early. I started in lasers when I was in my early 30s. So I had spent, my 20s, in ceramics and glass, which has some applications in lasers, obviously for optics and things. But anyway, then once you decide, you kind of have to jump in with both feet. Anybody that has a plan B typically fails, right? You have to just go all in, and be a little bit crazy in doing that, because those are the people that can persevere through the setbacks, right? So, for example, in my space, I developed a laser, and I'm an engineer, and I had prototypes. Then I did the clinical studies, and everything looked great. I did a clinical study, I had the prototypes, and I went and met everybody in the industry, both those that made professional lasers and say, hey, look, I got a home version. Do you like it? And they honestly laughed at me. They said, no, you don't know lasers. We know lasers. We've sold lasers for dozens of years. We know doctors. We know the whole industry. We're not interested, right? And so then I went to the consumer products companies, these large, companies that sell skincare topicals and some skincare devices for other applications like electric razors and things like that. And I said, certainly they understand consumers, and I have a new technology. Surely they'll see it's good, and they'll just put it in their portfolio, and they'll be able to destroy everybody else because they'll be the first and they'll be a much better technology. Of course, they all said, look, we don't know anything about lasers, and you haven't sold any, so it's too risky. Are we going to get sued? Is it going to sell? People don't think about lasering their face in the morning or the evening. That's like totally new. They said commercialize it, get some traction, then come back and see us, right? And so I was really deflated at that point because I had the better mousetrap. I proved that it worked. And so they said, well, get clinical studies and that are professionally, that we can take to the FDA. So then it was a couple $100,000 of investment to get the clinical studies. And then I brought those back to these people, and they said, oh, that's great, but you got to commercialize it. You actually have to, get it going. And so I said, all right, what if I get FDA? Then we'll be interested, because then you can just commercialize it. So then I got the FDA. I brought him the FDA certificate. I said, hey, check this out. Now you can just commercialize. You literally, it's good to go. You can sell it tomorrow, right? Just start advertising it, build a brand. And they said, no, it's still too risky. We don't know. We got to see that many people use it, and there's no legal barriers, no lawsuits, on these things. Make sure people use it correctly and things like that, and actually interested in it. And so I was like, I've never sold consumer products. I'm an engineer by training. That's all I've ever done. So I was really deflated, and I went back to my investors, and I said, look, we either shut down the company legitimately because no one was going to take it, or we have to launch a consumer product in a brand new category. No one ever thinks about lasering their face at home. And I've never done this before. I have no experience. I have no right to be in this space. And would you be surprised? Investors said, okay, let's commercialize. And I actually was like, I said, I can't believe it. I kind of didn't know where to start. So, and that's what you go through, like all these bumps in the road.
Right?
What's that?
It was pre-pandemic, right?
Yes, that's correct. Just before the pandemic. So we got traction in mid to late 2019. Pandemic hit, I think, mid to late 2020 or
Yeah,
2021.
it's
So
2020. Yeah.
we had a year of I hired some junior marketing people. That's all I could afford, who were right out of school, so they didn't know what they were doing either. And then we just looked at best practices, and we learned along the way. We experimented a lot with direct to consumer. We also tried in some spas and one pharmacy chain that was small, and we learned a lot. And our plan was just we're gonna fail fast. So you try something, see if it works. If it works, we'll do more of it. If it doesn't work, we shut it down quickly and move on. And that's how we got into direct to consumer.
I like that
These
concept of
days.
failure. That's how you learn. So basically, to do a quick recap, basically, I admire this story even more because you are relentless, right? Based on what you're saying, because you knocked on people's doors and they said, you do this one thing and come back. You did the one thing and see it's not enough. You did the next thing and it's not enough. And how many times you say, it's like, how did you feel? You said deflated, but like you said, like what, like you look up and it's like, what do you want from me? I'm
Exactly.
trying to solve a, I have a legitimate way of doing that. I've tested that. I did X, Y, Z. So yeah, I mean that.
So this is common. And if you're looking to raise money and develop technology, then exit, it's often the case where it's like climbing a mountain. You often see, well, that must be the summit. And then you go a little higher, and then you can see, oh no, there's another place that I can see on the horizon. That must be the summit. And I remember climbing a mountain in New Hampshire, and that happened like 15 times. I'm like, when are we going to get to the summit? And it's kind of like building a business, right? You think you'll get to a point where everything's going to be good, and then there's that next challenge to take you higher. But there's two ways you can react. You can react very negatively and give up, or you can say, look, this is what I need to move the business forward. And frankly, it was always good advice to get me to that next level. And so I persevered, made the company better, more valuable, stronger. Now I did this all with angel investment, which is even harder. So I had to do it on a shoestring and really smart. And in a sense, that can be good, right? Companies that do that get very efficient, very scrappy, and then as they grow, they can scale if they do it well, right? If you get a lot of VC money, you can be sloppy, right? Investment money, hire a lot of people, hire experts, and there's just a lot of fat there that maybe you don't do things as well, and you can burn through a lot of cash. And then if you don't turn the corner to profitability in time, you could flame out. And a lot of companies go through that. And then investors and the founders, they lose everything pretty much. So anyway, we've done it the other way, and it's kind of like Dyson. If you look at Dyson, the UK manufacturer of vacuums, he was actually quoted on podcast. He tried to sell really good vacuum technology and with some commercialization to Hoover and the other vacuum companies. And later on, he said, I was so glad they turned me down because he's created a multi-billion-dollar company that makes best in class, and he's rocked the vacuum world. He's also gone on to hair dryers and commercial items that he probably never would have gotten into. And so that's kind of what we're doing with Nira. We're pretty much the only one that has anything like this. It truly works. Over time, I think could revolutionize skincare.
In in an era of, you know, where people see that things are created fast and it's easy to, let's say, cheat, because we are not going to get into AI just yet in the conversation, but it's easy to source products from China or anywhere in the world, and at the end, you don't know whether the product is legit or not. You built something complex, something unique, and you took the work to do it right and test it right. The question is, once you started marketing that, you took that to the market, you started to sell that. How did you explain all that complexity, and how did you make clear that it was something legit and everything it took to build? And because there are many solutions, not only for in this space, in other spaces that are not legit and they claim to be. So was it hard to prove it to people?
It is hard because in our space, there's a lot of confusion out there because, like you said, there's a lot of Chinese devices like LED and RF and microcurrent, and the consumer doesn't know who to trust. And so you
So,
have to break through that noise and show how you're different and compare in a legitimate way that's professional, right? We don't want to trash other brands and everything. They all have their place, but help the consumer find out what's best for them. Okay. And so, for example, LEDs are quite popular. They have these LED masks and lots of different, wands that are LEDs and everything. And we've looked into the science, and consumers can do that. And FDA posts everyone's clearance letter on every device, including ours. And with ours, they reference our clinical study and the efficacy and everything. With all the red light, especially LEDs and some of the white light, they reference devices that are, if you keep going back to the original clinical study, it was way back before they even cared much about efficacy. And they have no direct testing of their own devices. And even people have tested the LEDs in a blinded test where you have blinded professionals reviewing before and after pictures in a randomized way for deep anti-aging like wrinkles and fine lines and such. They can't tell the difference between the before and the after. Whereas ours, we knock it out of the park. Greater than 80% get dramatic results in anti-aging. So we point people to the data based on the technology and say, which technology do you want to bet on, right? And everybody knows microcurrent has just a limiting effect that wears off in a day. It takes a long time to treat yourself, and you need a goopy gel, whereas ours lasts pretty much, for months and months. It's permanent skin rejuvenation that then, of course, if you stop, your skin will gradually age like it normally would, but you've turned back the clock, right? And if you keep using it, it just keeps getting better. So what we had to do is communicate these messages without getting overly technical. Like I'm probably getting too technical here, to say how it works and why it's better. And then we wrap it up with a 90-day guarantee. So a full 3 months, you can use Nira. If you don't get results that you see a meaningful difference, we'll give you your money back. Everyone else in the market doesn't do that. It's typically 30 days, at most 60 days, and you barely see anything, if at all.
right.
And they can be pretty hard on their return policy where we don't want unhappy customers. So that's been our philosophy. People thought I was crazy for doing that. And we looked at our returns, and would you believe we're half the industry average. So people want a device they can trust. And then we put apps with this so that they could sync up their sessions, and it gives them coaching and before and after pictures. They can customize the device, and they just love it. And with the app, we find people that use the app, they not only love it, but they're much more compliant. They're compliant 80 to 90+% of the time, daily usage, right? Whereas if you don't use the app, typically it's in the 60s, right? And of course, the more you use it, the better your efficacy. And when you can see the difference with the before and afters, it's positive. We've done what we call gamification. So if you keep going for so long, you get in-app awards and prizes. And then after a few months, if you're consistent, we actually send you free accessories. We'll send you a leather carry case. And then after a few more months, you get a bathrobe from Nira. And then after almost a year, you get a Nira watch. And it's all free. We just want to have fun and want customers to really enjoy the experience of getting younger. So we use all of these methods to kind of show we're different and to encourage people to give it a try. And then we work with influencers as well, which in most cases we don't pay. We give them a free device, maybe an affiliate code, and then they talk about us and their experience to an audience that generally trusts them, because we work with authentic influencers that won't say something just because they're paid, and that's really taken us to the next level, because you always are a little bit skeptical about what the company says. Even if they give you guarantees, many times you get caught with the guarantee has a catch here or there. We don't do that, but still there's always the caution there. So then influencers kind of fill in that gap to build trust and awareness and education. And that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. So many golden nuggets that you mentioned. So I wanted to ask you a few things about that. First off, it's great that you have an app, not just for the main use purposes, for people to do the stuff that you mentioned, but because you have your audience right there, in and of, I don't know, ads going are being more expensive, email is changing a lot, the landscape of email, and you having your audience in an app is much more intrusive in a good way, and you can communicate with them much better. And then you were saying that you like to, you know, let's say enhance the experience of the consumer. And
Mhm.
it's something we actually discussed, and it was a very interesting conversation with a former Disney executive. It was probably the first or second season, but I still remember to this day, he's now a consultant on how to Disneyfy experiences for consumers. So basically, the basics is, mapping out the customer journey
Mhm.
and then try to Disneyfy each step. So that's what you have done with or without noticing that. It's like, hey, they bought the device, then they engage with us, they use it, they do whatever we want them to do to have better results. So
Mhm.
we'll, add some twists to each of those steps or moments and create a better experience for them. And that's how you you get raving fans and happy customers in the end.
Yeah, it's great, and we love our customers. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting many of our customers. We have influencers and affiliates. We have events for the press. We've had events in London, New York, and just recently in Los Angeles. And that's where I can get out, meet some of the power users that are using it to write about in the press or to their audience, and it's wonderful. And answer the questions, and then also through like podcasts here, we can speak to larger audiences to inform them, and so because the journey is important, and people often, especially in skincare, they're disappointed, right? And you ask anyone that has skin concerns, are you satisfied with the products out there? And every single one, I haven't got a yes yet. They're like, no, I really want something more here or more there. And in most cases for anti-aging, even at the professional level, people aren't super, happy. Although it can be successful, it's just a lot of downtime and pain and side effects and of course cost, right? So there's that detractor. And then the results aren't guaranteed, even in the professional office. Okay, we're kind of the only ones that give you the money back guarantee at any level. And the other thing is you got to be careful because you don't want unnatural results or results that have side effects or potential health concerns. So, for example, acne with Accutane, it's a drug that's massively concerning for most people, okay? And it can lead to lifelong, problems. Whereas the laser can address acne and is perfectly natural. Same with anti-aging. You can have fillers, you can have Botox. Botox is a toxin, and you can permanently disfigure your face by turning off muscles that may never come back, right? So you got to do it very carefully. And if done well, of course, it works, and there's some good medical treatments for things that, are medical needs where muscles overreact. But anyway, with Nira, we can do it naturally, and get all natural results with none of the risks, and a guarantee. That's part of the skincare journey, is having people understand that. And then we say, look, take the Nira 90-day challenge. Right? We try to make it fun, right? That for 90 days, use the Nira. If you don't get results, you have lost nothing, and you have risked nothing, right? I mean, what's not to love about that? And then it
Right.
feels good. And then we have great customer service that you can call. We actually have the phone number at the bottom of our page. You don't have to search for it. And whether you're in the UK or Europe or the US, we have numbers for all of those areas that you call us up, and you get a skincare expert that you can talk to. So that's part of the journey. Then the apps, and then the gamification, the prizes, right? And then the upgrades. We continue to make Nira better, and we have had many people upgrade from the Precision, which is a small one just for the eyes, to the Pro, and then we have a Pro Plus we just launched, which is more powerful and faster with all the great benefits and results. So anyway, I'm excited. I'm passionate about the space, as you can see,
Yeah, I can
and I
tell,
just
but
love helping people out.
you have very good reasons to be. So you said that you do events in different locations and even countries and continents. Do you operate in those places too? Like, do you have business in the UK and other places in Europe as well?
We have a warehouse and fulfillment distribution in both the EU and the UK. And then in the US, this is where we make all our products. So it's made in the USA, tariff free, mind you. You don't have to worry about that.
For
and then we fulfill all the U.S. And Canada stuff right from all the orders right from our headquarters in New Hampshire, and then we also have customer service that you can call into in all of those geographies to get a person alive within reasonable hours, and we'll help you out.
some many brands, due to the tariffs that you mentioned, or some other reasons, are looking at expanding internationally, and in most cases, I would say it's to Europe. To Europe.
Mhm.
What could you tell them? Like, what was like the main challenges or the things that you underestimated about going international that probably you needed to deal with?
So, as hard as might be to hear, if you have a solid brand in the US, like we had a reasonably solid but young brand in the US, we went to the UK. Literally, from a commercial standpoint, you're starting from scratch almost. We do have the benefit of YouTube being in English. They get some of the YouTube videos and their searches over there. So that helps out that there's some awareness. So we get a little overlap. But literally, we had to do many events with the press. You give away free evaluation units to affiliates, influencers, and the press. And then I did several events in the UK for those different, people groups to get the word out there. And then we have to advertise. So we have Meta advertising in Facebook and Google and places like that, Google advertising, and then other places where it makes sense.
Right.
And those are expensive. You have to pay money to be in those social media feeds and in those web searches, so that the name recognition is built over time. They learn about you, and then when they're at that stage of life where okay, they're going to commit to a device, and they now choose between everything out there. Nira has some mind share, and then they evaluate a little further with research, and then hopefully they choose Nira. So that is part of the buying journey that requires just a lot of commercial effort, right? So I've had to fly to the UK many, many times. And I just had a flight to southern France, where I'm starting to meet distributors there. And we're into luxury spas now, which is a one retail channel in both the US and Europe. So it takes an effort. So just because you made it in one geography doesn't mean you're necessarily making another. It's quite common for brands to be solid in one area and just be failures in another area. So each time commercially, you got to do a good job.
And what about the culture, because there are differences between cultures typically, right? I'm not sure whether for this product type or vertical you found the same or not. Like, I don't know, some people value one thing in the US, let's say,
Mhm.
but in the UK, they just don't want that or they want something else. So was that was that the case for Nira or was it probably seamless?
So for Nira, it was largely seamless. There was some different ways people got informed. So, for example, in the UK, they still read newspapers a lot. So the Daily Mail, the Irish Daily Mail, and
Right.
some of the magazine periodicals, Elle, Good Housekeeping, and such, are still quite well read over there, and they look to those people in the press and the editors for guidance in their purchase decisions. And there's still a lot of trust there. In the U.S., not so much, right? In the U.S., people do a lot of research in YouTube and with bloggers and affiliates and such, and the press isn't as prominent an influence. There's still social value there, so we've gotten awards from all the major press, including folks like Cosmopolitan and Elle Magazine and Good Housekeeping. We have their seal of approval, which is really cool. And most of these awards aren't paid, and they actually test the device, and it's a real award, and that's why we love it, because we want authenticity to be there. Because once you lose
Right.
that trust, the business is on shaky ground. So, and you can be a fad if you lose trust. People will move on from you quick, and we want to be like tried and true and solid. Even if we grow slower, we'd rather say it takes 90 days to really see great results. You will see results after 30 and 60, but we really need you to stick with us for 90, because that's when it really kicks in a big way. And of course, it gets better if you keep using it. Um, so we're upfront about that. And if you're not willing to put a couple months of use into it, don't buy Nero. We'll actually say that, because you won't be happy, right? And it's true with any exercise routine. Anything where your body is transforming itself, it takes a few months for the body to transform, whether it's curing acne, losing weight, gaining muscle, right? You got to give it a couple months.
Yeah, exactly. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that your father once showed you one of the first computers
Yeah.
created, right? And he told you something like the following that, well, that it did the job of 100 people or
Hmm.
so, right?
Yeah.
So do you feel that this kind of the same is happening these days with AI? And if so, are you incorporating that or looking to incorporating that in Nira?
Yes. So interesting. Yeah, my father did tell me that exact thing. Walked me into the early mainframes, which were the size of a room with raised floor and air conditioning and even some vacuum tubes there, big spinning disk drives that were like 14 inches across and punch cards. So I actually made some punch cards and that was the program memory is punch cards and you feed them
Right.
literally into a reader that zips through the punch cards and then the program runs. And I was in awe. And growing up, I saw computers get smaller and smaller and smaller until the point that literally we're holding what used to be supercomputer class in our hands. And now it's fully connected and networked, and we can do amazing things that people only dreamed about 20 years ago, right in our hands. And I thought, why can't we do that with lasers? And literally, lasers were invented in the early 60s. Integrated circuits were invented in the early 60s. So you can see how far integrated circuits come. Why aren't lasers in our hand? And that was my dream. So that was the kind of genesis of me driving this forward the way I have. And it's been a great journey. As far as artificial intelligence, that is moving even faster, right? Now, artificial intelligence, is limited to some degree, right, in the hardware realm. So it's taken over like the natural language interpretation and translation, and it's very efficient at giving you creative results. Let me just say, creative results. You can't always trust it. If you run to the bank with it, sometimes you'll see it's dead wrong. It's literally taken, garbage on the internet, garbage in, garbage out, very efficiently, very, very elegantly, but it could be wrong. So it's still obviously got a ways to go. But what's exciting is now it's starting to hit hardware, like with the AI for robots that's trained in the AI, sphere, and even the recent Tesla robots were all trained in computer simulations before it was actually applied to the hardware. So when they fell in a computer simulation and they didn't break any hardware or anything, and they learned to balance better and things like that. And then once they can do it well, simulation, they put it into the system for the actual physical robot, and then you could see the latest dancing videos are pretty cool. So it's moving very fast. When it comes to science and hardware tissue interaction, yeah, AI is going to be an assistant, but I think humans are still going to be involved in that for a while. And so we've introduced AI in our app, which is still in alpha testing, for skin analysis. Right. So it's going to come out in about a month, maybe 2 months, but very soon with good pictures from your camera and actually give you guidance. Is the lighting correct? Are you lined up? It takes a scan picture with your phone camera in selfie mode and then does a skin analysis on about a dozen different attributes: age spots, wrinkles, dark circles, um, acne, etc. And then you can click on each dot. I'll give you a score from 0 to 100. So you click on acne, like where do I have acne spots? And it'll actually highlight the acne spots. Where do I have wrinkles? And it'll show you the wrinkles. And then over time, as you're using the Nira, you do a subsequent skin analysis, and then you say, all right, how am I doing? And it'll compare before versus after and track with wrinkles. All right, you're going down, keep going. Eventually you'll get to very little wrinkles or no wrinkles and 100% score. And the same thing with all those other attributes. And the nice thing about the highlights is you might not see some things like brown spots can be like underneath in the infrared version of the skin analysis captures that you can't visibly see with your eyes, and then to treat some spots that you physically can't see with your eyes. And this is all AI informed or AI trained. So they took 70,000, almost 100,000 um, pictures of people's faces that experts said, all right, here are the wrinkles, here's the wrinkle score, here's for this spot, that spot. And then they train the AI. So when you take a picture of your face, it compares that against all it's learned and says, yep, that's a dark spot. That's not a dark spot. That's acne. That's a wrinkle, etc. And it's very accurately in a clinical grade capability, right? They use these for clinical studies, literally, is now just like you have a clinical laser in your hand, and it is a class 2 laser certified for home use. You'll have, a clinical analysis tool to see how you're doing and where your skin concerns are.
You don't.
I'm passionate. I told you. I warned you,
Amazing, amazing. So I could keep going forever, but I want to be respectful with your time. So I have 1,000 questions probably that I'll probably ask you synchronically because I love the answers. You are doing some amazing stuff, and it takes a lot of work because I have interviewed over 200 companies of all sizes, and all of them do amazing stuff. But this is something I have never seen. Of course, it's super, super complex, but it required to build the first version to take it to market. And now what you are doing with the latest trends and the latest technology, I could say, which is AI, it's amazing. So congrats on that.
Brian, we're just getting started because we have a whole roadmap, and we're literally going to launch a new laser every year. So next year, we're going to come out with a best-in-class permanent laser hair removal device. So you don't have to shave anymore any part of your body that you don't want hair. Literally, you can be able to zap it off with a laser. It'll be customized and optimized just for laser hair removal. So it'll be different than our current device. And then we're going to move on the year after that to skin disease, starting with acne. So literally, you'll be able to zap away acne even before it starts coming, when you can feel it coming, because the laser can go deep right at the source of acne and can get rid of it before it actually appears.
That's a dream come true for many people. So I'm happy to hear that. And many people will be super happy to use that as well. So David, before you go, I wanted to ask you something. Do you have, I like asking you whenever I have a guest on the podcast, if they have a book to recommend to the audience, because it started as a selfish question back then because I wanted to know what else to read and get outside of my own, books, etc. And then I started to publish an annual list of books mentioned on the podcast because I realized that many people were interested in, discovering something new and interesting from amazing people such as yourself as well. So do you have any book that comes to mind?
Absolutely. My favorite book, if you want to really understand how industry can disrupt the norm and really take us to the next level, you have to read Innovator's Dilemma by Craig Christensen. Okay, that's Innovator's Dilemma. And it basically talks about how an industry vertical, like computers, will be disrupted, but it's never by the same company, right? Or an industry like, well, skincare, or like phones, right? The Nokia, Ericsson, Motorola, they're not here anymore. They were disrupted by Samsung, Apple, and others, right? So with each major shift in an industry, it disrupts. And the innovator is almost always someone who has no business to be there. And that's kind of what gave me inspiration that I could do this, because I'm kind of disrupting an industry that has never done it this way. And so if you want to do that, that's a good book to read.
It's amazing. David, where can people go to learn more about you and Nira?
Niraskin.com as a website. You'll see lots of podcasts, including this one, which we're going to post, as well as all the science, the FDA clearances, and of course, the ability to learn about how to use Nira and our guarantees and to purchase it.
Amazing. So we're in the audience. First off, thank you for staying this far. Second, if you go to the DTCinsider.com and find the episode, you will see the full show notes, including, of course, Nira's website, social media handles, the book you mentioned, and many other stuff that we discussed. David, it was a true pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
This episode was brought to you by BSR Digital. We help DTC brands grow through paid ads and email marketing campaigns. If you'd like us to help your business grow, head on over to bsrdigital.com and schedule a call with us.